I want to start the conversation by getting your journey story to New York, which I know you've told before, but where are you from? How'd you get to the city?
I've told this a lot, but it seems to be a part of the myth, I guess, that people... I grew up about 70 miles away in Bethlehem, PA, so it's not very far geographically, but I guess as I get older, I realize that culturally it's a pretty big shift to New York, or at least to like the arts world. I feel like my friends from high school who live here are a lot of them are like in med tech or like physicians, like they have some kind of technical thing that brought them to New York, but maybe they have a finance job, but there's just the people who came, a few of us like tried to make it in New York. And I guess, frankly, I think I'm the only one who, from my friend group growing up, that stuck here that I know of.
Was that always a dream of yours to make it here?
I don't know. I think growing up I played in bands, so I had more of an idea of like, I wanted to be a musician, which meant like on tour. So I don't think I wanted to be like Radiohead when I was 17. So I didn't, I think that was amorphous. Like I just wanted to have a cool recording studio, like in a barn. And then I don't think it was really my dream. I just think by the time I graduated from college, I didn't have a good plan. I had no other alternative. And New York was like the most competitive, crazy place to move. So
obviously from what I know about your career, I mean, you've been fairly prolific over the last number of years. Were you always oriented that way as a kid? Were you a writer by nature always, or not necessarily?
Definitely. No, definitely. I was like writing novels as a kid and trying to, it's like some of my first really substantial memories are creative memories. So I would write songs on the piano and I would write like long stories on my desktop or in notebooks, and I would I was always inventing worlds. I was definitely one of those kids who like lived in alternate realities a lot of the time.
How do you explain that? I don't know if that's a gene genes that run in your family. Like, do you have other creatives in your...
My sister is a genius songwriter and like a very, very good writer in general. And we don't really know why we are the way we are. I mean, I think our parents were mildly creative or wanted to be, but certainly we didn't grow up in like an environment where it was not like a precocious Park Slope Montessori school education. I mean, I think my mom got us a piano that was in the basement, and my parents paid for, piano lessons, and like my sister took ballet and singing. But I mean, I mostly was expected to, and I wanted to play sports growing up. So I was much more interested in Little League. I mean, like my creative side was like totally my own thing, and I hid it from people. My grandmother on my mom's side was a cultured man and like had gotten a scholarship to the local private school and had a lot of interest in literature. And I mean, like my parents both read. My dad would take me to the library. My dad was a history teacher, so he would always give me history books, and I really liked historical fiction as an adolescent. So yeah, it was eclectic, but there was no, like, it wasn't a high culture, and there was no expectation that I would be producing high culture. I think my parents were both very encouraging in terms of like, I don't know, like sort of telling us that we could do things. Like conversely, we didn't come from like a family where we would be punished if we were creative. It was definitely encouraged, and I was in the gifted program, and like, there was some sense of like I would test well, and then that gives you like a feedback. Like I would test really well on verbal things, so then I would get kind of harder or like more creative assignments, and so that but it was pretty normal suburban America kind of. Yeah, like getting into the gifted program is maybe the highest level of like creative encouragement that you can get. There wasn't a whole lot beyond that.
You said that
no camps, no, special programs.
You were mentioning that you were very interested in baseball and Little League, and that I think you said you hid your creative bent. Why? Why was that something you were hiding?
Because you'd get called names, like because it was gay. I don't know. And because I had no way of like understanding if that language could translate. It had no social capital in my high school or my middle school, and among my friends. Like I think towards like 17, once I played in bands like starting at 16, and that was like playing music was the most socially acceptable form of creative output, which is why probably I did it. And it like had some sex appeal, some cool factor, but not even like it really wasn't. I did not go to like a hipster high school. It was not a lot of art kids. It was a pretty classic like football, cheerleader, high school environment. So there's very little incentive to being on the lit mag. Like, it was not a validated, which I was, but I wasn't super validated. So I think just putting other things, other feet forward was just a way to sort of remain normal. I didn't know how to not be normal. And I'm like glad that now I like play sports every weekend. Like I don't mind having had a somewhat grounding high school town experience, and then it also maybe prevented me from, I don't know, I guess when you aren't sharing and you aren't really being validated for being like I read all the time, but I would not let other people know how much I was reading, except for my parents maybe knew I like to read. But I guess it stops you from burning out too quickly or becoming like kind of too deft to accomplish. Like I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I didn't have I'm a tutor now, but I didn't have like a fancy tutor. And I didn't have too much encouragement. So there wasn't, I think a lot of people who have like every opportunity early tend to get either bored or feel like have imposter syndrome. And I didn't have imposter syndrome because I wasn't arriving anywhere. So
it's a good way to put it. I want to talk about the transition time from college to New York and what you remember about coming here for the first time as an adult post-college, the struggles, the memories. What do you recall from that early time in New York City?
A lot. The first year is pretty vivid in my memory. I think the mid-20s is where things get foggy because maybe it's not worth remembering. I didn't have much with me. I brought like 2 book bags, 2 duffel bags to New York. I got off the bus, moved into my roommate from college, and I shared an apartment with this other girl I'd met traveling abroad. So it was like 3 of us in 2 bedrooms and in Bushwick. And it was kind of actually before Bushwick was gentrified completely. So at the time, we were on the Halsey Street stop, which now there's a ton of stuff there and a ton of like coffee shops and rock climbing walls. And like, it's really gentrified. But at the time, people that was like really hard to get to and not worth traveling that far down the L. Like we couldn't throw parties because no one would want to take the L that far. Now I think it's obviously 15 years or 14 years later, it's like people don't want to leave that area. But yeah, I think I had 2 part-time jobs. I read a lot and was like very, very romantic about New York and walked around a lot. Would often leave, I still have a flip phone, but then I would like leave my phone at home. I had like 1 laptop that didn't work except it was like an old laptop that only worked if you plugged it in. And so it really wasn't online at all, which I really envy.
Yeah.
And I would just kind of talk my way into interesting places and parties. And I really just didn't have an agenda. I was like writing a lot of poetry and like submitting poems to literary magazines, which was it's a hard thing to believe I like took time to do. And sometimes I would get $50 and get published, and that felt good. But it was nothing. And yeah. And by the end of that year, I was pretty burnt out just from maybe lacking an income, a substantial enough income to like have, sharing a bedroom was kind of shameful. Like I couldn't bring anyone home, or if I would, I'd have to do it on afternoons when no one else was home. It was pretty bohemian, and I had no self-esteem socially. Again, I guess I had some like private self-esteem from feeling like I was smart and I knew things and I could write well. But the problem is when your outer world and your inner world aren't synced up, you start to develop a kind of inflated ego because when nobody pays attention to you, you have to be your only source of confidence. So you become like weirdly defiant. I like now will meet younger male writers who are like, nobody knows how great of a novel I'm writing. And I get that feeling like but then you start to ruin opportunities when they do come along because you're so resentful, and it's a dangerous narrative to walk around thinking like you are the next great thing. And I think I bordered on that at the time, but I also was in many ways more open and naive in ways that I could never get back. So yeah, it's a special year. Nothing really happened. I just had, I kept falling in love or thinking I did. But I met I went through I found new friends and lost old friends, and it just was growing up.
Do you remember how much your rent was?
$425.
Do you remember roughly how much money you were spending in total per month?
It's like $1,000, probably. Like I would eat avocados with spoons. I would buy like dollar avocados a lot. That was my main protein source. I was also a raw vegan that year for most of that year. No, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy how much more expensive things are, but also how much my own threshold. I didn't take a cab till I was 26, and I took a cab over here. Not that in fact, I don't have tons of disposable income, but I think relative to that, I do. And yeah.
Did you feel poor?
Yeah. Not in the sense of, like, my parents lived 70 miles away, so I could always get on, as long as I could afford a bus back to, I don't want to claim it was poverty in the sense of like real poverty without a backstop, but poor in the sense that it was embarrassing to have to move home at the end of that year for the son. Like I spent a few months at home the next year. I couldn't afford another lease. I hadn't accomplished enough to like justify moving into my another apartment, and I didn't want to live with the people I was living with. I just was kind of lost. So yeah, I did feel poor in a certain way, but again, not in the like I couldn't afford to feed myself, or I was on my own, or I was on my parents' health care, that kind of thing. So.
Do you remember at that time what your dreams or goals were for being in here? It sounds like you were happy to be in New York, wanted to be in New York.
Yeah, I was writing a novel. I wanted to like write a novel and sell it, I guess, was maybe my best, or like write a film script. And I think my dream was just to sell some piece of writing, and then it was a different market. I think there's now a lot of discourse about male novelists, and it just hadn't, or like the lack of viability of male novelists, but we hadn't quite taken that turn away from men yet in culture. We're still a few years away from that, so the return of the male hadn't happened yet. And, so I had this idea that if you work, you could just get something to happen for yourself and you'd be rewarded. But in hindsight, now having sold my writing at different junctures, like it goes so fast. I think my sense of like being able to my sense was that you could live for years off a book deal or a TV deal or something, and that is not really true. It might have been a little bit more true then, but it is. I will say, I think writers used to be able to live for longer off selling a piece of journalism or a piece of fiction or a screenplay, but it was more sustainable. But even then,
do you remember? And I'd love to bring this closer to today, but your discipline of work, of how I think people that may come across this are going to be interested in the story of how you went from that to here.
Which a tiny room in Brooklyn. But it's my tiny room. Well, if just for context, we're in my theater space in Greenpoint. So we have the second floor of a building, and that is a pretty big. And we pay the rent through selling tickets, and that's a pretty big accomplishment. But it's a great question. I think there's a whole theater side of this that happened a few years later. But one thing is just like steadily. One thing that's true is pretty much every single day since that year, I've worked on something. Like I've had, and if maybe there are days when I don't put pen to paper, proverbially, I've thought about what I'm going to do next. Like I guess one upside of never really finding real financial security creatively is that you have to keep going. So I have never really been able to plateau. Now that I'm a little bit more accomplished, I have like there might be months where I'm doing better, like stretches where I can say I've brought in this much from my writing or my directing or whatever, but I've never had like, oh, I'm now good for the next 3 years, the next decade. And some people are. There are some people who get gargantuan deals or they blow up on TikTok or something, but it's definitely not my reality. So I think, it's a mixture of necessity and then just inner willpower, which I'm not really sure what or why that is the case, but I'm definitely sure that without like that consistent creative practice, I definitely wouldn't have the resources that I have now.
Have you ever thought seriously about quitting and doing something completely different? Never.
No. I'm sick. Actually don't know what I would do. Like, I mean, I have a tutoring job. Like, I've tutored for a long time. I've taught. Like, I've always had some kind of job in education, but there have been times when I've been doing a lot less writing and a lot more teaching, and I've been pretty miserable just with that. Like, but I only have one other really applicable skill. Like, I only have humanities-based skills, which is a pretty narrow. Yeah, I don't know. I'd be a farmer or something. I would just start over. And if I had to stop, I would not stay in New York, and I would not stay. I don't know. Like, if I weren't doing this, I'd have to do something totally different. I don't think I could stay in the realm of New York creatives and not be.
Have you ever gotten advice from others, your family, or people close to you that it's time to find something else to do?
No. I think that's the one signal. I mean, I think my dad was worried about me he's a very practical guy, but I think the one signal that I always had was I think that I always had I always had a lot of positive feedback. I always had a sense that there was something good about what I was doing. I should clarify for listeners that I don't feel like I was living totally in obscurity, in the sense that if you have like a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a friend or a sibling, or if you have 1 to 5 people who are like, hey, this is, there's something to what you're doing, then that's enough. That's like the massive difference. I think there are people who are, to be frank, I think if you're operating in total obscurity and you don't have a single fan, it's probably maybe in the beginning that's justifiable, but you can't go, if you've gone years into a life in New York where you have absolutely zero genuine encouragement, I think that's probably a sign that you don't have enough talent. Maybe there are edge cases where someone is so incredibly talented that they're blindingly gifted and no one can look at them. But I think for the most part, you have to have some kind of signal. But I think I should clarify that I did have people who told me I was special, and that there was there were enough, again, not a ton, but having a few friends who like to read what you write or think you should build on what you're doing, who donate to your little projects. And I had a little bit of that. And I didn't have anyone overwhelmingly negative. There was no one saying you've got nothing, fold up shop. I think a vast majority of people are indifferent or neutral, but that's different than hostility or nobody told me I was talentless. I think there were people who told me I might need to use my talents in different ways, but I wasn't getting that. I wasn't like a singer who can't sing, is tone deaf.
In your judgment, what does it take to be a talented writer?
I don't have any crazy opinion about this. You have to have some instinct that goes back. I think you probably have to have known since you were young, on the younger side, I think. And then you have to work really hard and read a lot. I think the biggest thing is probably, I don't think you can manufacture talent, but you can read more than you write. I think in the era of Substack and even ChatGPT, there are a lot of people who like writing. There's content writing, which has become almost weirdly synonymous with writing, like literature. I think marketing newsletters are as popular now as like short stories. And I think there's a lot of writing now, like internet writing is written by people who don't read more than they write, and that's pretty. And then I think what AI is doing is showing how mechanical and reproducible most, like in a sense, all language is, and how there's a formula to language. And so the downside of that is it's bad for one's self-esteem, but the upside of it is you see, well, if you can intervene, if you can be that 1% or less than 1%, that's different than what can be automated or generated, then that's kind of the sign. But that just takes endless reading, I think, and then endless iteration.
What do you read?
I read a lot of things. I still read a lot of history. I always have. Philosophy, classic. I think fiction, but less fiction than I used to, but I think one thing is I try to read a little bit of poetry every day in the morning. I think that's big. I think the last year I've been probably as bad about that as I ever have, but if I had some of the habits now that I have now, if I had those habits 15 years ago, I definitely would have not have succeeded, because I think, ironically, now that I'm managing a business and managing this whole company and I do more interviews, like there's a lot more business that I like, just emails I have to answer. And that's one of the other advantages of like having worked in obscurity. There wasn't much demand on my time. But yeah, I mean, I think the King James Bible is good. I read some of the Bible today. Growing up, like through my early 20s, I read a ton of biographies and letters and diaries. I was really interested in like the biographies of artistic and literary figures. I reread Ulysses every year for 10 years, from like 20 to 30. I would do that every spring. Like, but as almost a study. Like, I mean, that's a book, the more you read, it's true that the more you yield something. Shakespeare obviously has been important to me from the beginning. Yeah, you could ask, there's a long list. But I've always loved browsing in used bookstores. It's just it's always been one of my favorite things to do. And I like obscure books. I'm reading this book about Tantra that I bought which is not so much about sex, but it's just like this one guru's book. And I think it's good. I don't know. I couldn't even tell you who the guru is, but it's a good meditation.
You were talking about habits. I'm curious how habitual you are. What does an average day look like? And how solidified is your daily routine? How committed to that are you?
It used to be like super rigid, and I used to be really disciplined. Like, read poetry, write poetry, read fiction, write fiction, go for a run. But now my life is way too fragmented to do all that before noon or before 1. It was a time when I was a high school teacher, so I would like wake up at 4:30, read and run, and then get on the train and write. Like the novel that I have coming out in the spring, it was mostly written on the subway. The first draft was written on the subway when I was a high school teacher. Now it's all over the place. Like, I now go to the gym like late at night, like 2 a.m, because I get home. But there's one in my basement, so and I also don't want to share it with. I hate being like, and it's a small fitness room, so I don't know. I like enjoy the routine of going down at like 2 a.m. and working out. Not like nothing crazy, but just enough and then I fall asleep easily. I dictate a lot now. I have a little digital recorder that's not connected to the internet that I'll like talk to myself when I'm alone. I'll talk to myself a lot, and then I do use AI to transcribe that. And then I have, mainly because I found, the more my computer, like the more I associate my laptop with the internet, and the harder it is to write on it. So I have a typewriter, I have the digital recorder. Anything that's not, is really fucking hard for me to write on a laptop. I'm so distracted, I can't. So I have to like basically just shut off and have a period where I'm just kind of talking or writing. But yeah, I think for the most part, when I don't have a day job to go to or something, it's read and write in the morning, and then late at night do like practical stuff. Like I tutor, so usually that's like a 3 to like late afternoon to early evening job, and then theater's also like a night job. So it's something like read, write, tutor, theater, gym, read, bed, and then something like that. But I'm also like I think deep work basically makes sense. Like, there are times when you throw everything out the window and you have to finish something. Like, you just commit a whole 48 hours to finishing something. Like, I think I'll like chip away. And then when I get the sense that I'm onto something, I'll just like, my parents, they live close enough. So I'll often go home to really knock things out, get away from New York. So
the plays that are currently in production that are people in the New York area can come and see, how did they come to you? I'd be curious to know how you found these characters, how you describe in yourself where the ideas that made them came from. Is it just observing our insane world and putting that down on paper? How do you think about that? Yeah.
I think I often, with plays, it's very much I see a room and I have a mood or a tone, and then the details I have to work out later. And I usually have a title, weirdly enough. So I'll get like Doomers. Immediately I saw it's 2 scenes. It's the Sam Altman War Room, and then it's the board that fired him. And I had that title and I had that structure. With Quartet, the one I know that you saw, like, I had the name. I was listening to string quartets. It was quarantine. It was the first like month of COVID. I just wrote like quartet into my final draft file, and then I was like, so 4 people in a room, and then I think I wrote the first page, and someone says like someone has to start taking off their clothes because it's a couple swapping play, and then I had to figure out. It's almost like a murder mystery. We're like, okay, you have 4 people in a room. Someone says something kind of off color, and then I have to figure out why. Well, how did we get here? Where are we going? I almost have to justify. Like, I give myself really strong constraints. I have 4 people. They're drinking. They're talking about having group sex or couple swapping. Well, what are their backstories? Why is that relevant? It's not just gratuitous in the sense that it can't just be. It's not a skit, so they need to have lives outside of the room. But I also have to work all of that out in the room. How do I do that? And then one thing leads to another. But I don't normally know where I'm going. So there's like a big twist at the end of Quartet. I didn't know that twist was there until I got to the end of the play. Writing, I might not have even have been in the first draft, but there's like a certain point at which I go, oh, there's like, when I teach playwriting workshops, I say like, you want to set up logic that that's iterative, that is self-sustaining, and that you shouldn't try to prevent unfolding. Like, for me, I want to set up initial conditions and then try to extrapolate from those initial conditions so that by the end there's a force of a conclusion that I can't myself turn away from or deny. And that's when I think the best endings come from, is that sense that I've written through the logic. And so there's a rational element too. But it also depends on the play. I think like a play like Quartet, which is basically a comedy, for me, is slightly different than something that might be more personal or more emotional. But yeah, I'm pretty formalistic in the way that I usually have really strong constraints. I usually have a really strong sense of, like, I usually have a ruler. Like, the play can't be this, it can't be this, it can't be that, it can't be, and it's usually pretty numerical, like 4 scenes, 4 characters. Like, I'll give myself numbers that I have to hit, X number of pages, and then I think that allows me to actually be more free because the number of variables is pretty limited. So
I don't know how often you think about this, but when you look around New York City and America and the world, and you think about future plays or even plays that are currently in production, what are the major themes that for you strike you as particularly noteworthy, interesting? Obviously, I think your plays must have these elements in them, but in general, I mean, you just talked about AI and Sam Altman and a couple swapping and Quartet. What are you seeing? What to you is interesting about what's happening in the world today?
Well, I guess this is a kind of a cliche, but it is this collision between like world-altering technology and then really primal habits and needs. And on a really basic level, yeah, we have pretty old hardware and even relatively old software, and then we have like biological software, and then we have these insane tools. So I don't know if there's a single thing other than and I also feel like I really hated the 2010s. I think I think most people are coming around to that point of view. I think that's why my plays have gotten more popular, is they're really pessimistic about, I mean, I've written a lot of essays which in some way refer to this point, but like millennials, my generation, like, I don't think we created much of value. And I think in a lot of ways we actively, in the name of virtue, destroyed a lot of things and destroyed each other. And there was just not a lot of grace given, and like a weird radicalism towards the future. Like, we also, I think millennials were techno-optimists for the most part, and a real belief that you could update the present by like kind of changing the past or getting rid of the past. And I think a lot of the utopian rhetoric of the late Obama years just really has proven to be it was not fruitful. And so I think, and at the same time, it feels like there is like a pretty oceanic paradigm shift happening now in ways that with consequences that I don't fully understand, that I think is partly based on this aversion, this realization that the last like 15 years just in many ways have not been very human. A lot of like most people feel more disconnected than they used to. those who can remember what it felt like, and those who don't remember, like, have no other alternative or mental model for what life could be like. And so, no, I don't know. Will we build something even remotely better? I have no idea. Or something better, but and then there might just be like what Doomers talks about is just like, well, might not matter because AI might go crazy and it might be way out of our hands faster than we think. So I think it's this weird mixture of, on one hand are like, are gaming apps destroying young men versus like, will AI robots destroy the earth? We equally have to answer whether DraftKings is bad for dating or like Tinder's bad for dating and DraftKings is bad for, life versus will we be wiped out by Skynet? I think the fact that maybe in the same way that the mid-century had like the sexual revolution plus nuclear annihilation as this weird duality. Yeah. I think we're obviously going through some kind of reciprocal version of that where we have these quotidian questions about like, how do we love each other? How do we interact? And is humanity over?
Yeah. I think you just touched on this a little bit, but as a fellow millennial, I have to ask you, what do you think we destroyed without unwittingly perhaps? What did we not show grace towards?
Well, I think like, and I speak from experience, like traditions. Like, I mean, there was a time when I was a polyamorous, we're all vegan, like, and this idea that I've improved on the past by getting rid of meat eating and commitment and what was I thinking? And that wasn't I've gone through a lot of different phases, but this idea that you could vote for the right person, change your diet, get a Fitbit. Like I didn't ever have a Fitbit, but like we could just optimize a couple things about ourselves and about how, like, and our bodies. And for some people it was pronouns, for some people it was tattoos. But these in the end, like extremely superficial shifts. And then over time, I think millennials in bad faith just like wouldn't admit that it wasn't all improvable, that certain things were just like better. Now, maybe in the 50s, a lot of men were closeted alcoholics or like men who shouldn't have been fathers. So I'm not saying like I think it's a lot of progress has largely been positive, but it's just like this lack of respect and balance. And I think we're seeing that's where there's been a conservative turn in politics, but I think it's less political than that. I think it's more, we were the generation that were just like, okay, smartphones, great. We're all on them. We just made these massive wholesale system updates repeatedly. And then all of a sudden the system update 10, we're like, we forget how to get back to, was there something good about one that we liked? That's how I feel like the last 15 years were. And then very self-congratulatory. So it's not apocalyptic. I don't think we've just ruined the world completely, but I think we've made life less. And then the kind of shrill virtue, language has just made the office less. Family has made friendships less. Going to the bar, like we introduce a lot of this HR language into and kind of mandate it and demand it that we have it. And I think that's, again, it's not apocalyptic, but it's made life marginally less human. People are, and I think it's not just that, but just the absence of signal achievements, the absence of, now maybe there are things that we're missing, but it felt like music was kind of going to be a good thing. And then we kind of didn't, after 2012, it seemed like music didn't really keep happening. I don't know.
Why are we like that? Why are millennials, why have we done that?
I think there's a mismatch between skill set and aspiration. I think the really broad explanation, the sense that I got having grown up in like a, not affluent, but not poor, so like not even a suburb, but like a nice middle-class town with nice, my friends had, for the most part, good families and good family environments. But looking at my high school and my senior graduating class, like there were like 15 of us who all thought we were like the special art kid. We all had received this encouragement. We were all taught to think that we were better than like having the jobs that our parents or grandparents had. And then I think that is really a pretty poisonous mentality in hindsight. Because if everyone is some combination of a super virtuous, super artistic, progressive hero, then like who, I don't know. That can't be true. Nature doesn't distribute talent that way, but also doesn't distribute moral goodness that way. And so when reality hit and the economy wasn't strong, we didn't have like hard skills, and we didn't have humility, I think. But what we did have is tact, and we had tech and politics, which are kind of the two worst things. So white collar jobs for our generation were like NGOs in Washington, or like Silicon Valley jobs. I think that's kind of borne out in real estate. The real estate market, you can sort of see where the millennial economy was most efficacious. You can see it by looking at real estate, which cities changed as a result of the millennial economy working a certain way.
Last question. I know we're getting short on time, so I want to close with somebody comes across this who is basically a young version of you who's just moved to New York, and I think you said you've been here for over a decade, well over a decade.
Yeah, since 2011.
2011.
Mostly. I mean, I went to grad school outside of New York, but yeah. Okay, so what would I say to a younger version of myself?
Advice to be able to stay an artist, to make more or less make it in the city. Everybody's journey is different, but what advice? I'm sure you get this a lot. What advice would you give?
Work on the things that you wish were in the world. Like, if you aren't impressed by what you're doing, don't make a Substack and post it. Like, don't try to create content. Like, I think it's so easy to disseminate something now, but it's much harder to know if you have something worth disseminating.
Yeah.
Like, do the Lindy things. Do the things that writers have always done. Learn languages, read books, write by hand, spend time thinking, and ask the best writers for advice. Like, don't aim to be great. Like, you have to aim to try to be James Joyce or Shakespeare or Virginia Woolf. Like, it's okay to want to be James Baldwin. It's okay to want to be. You have to aim for that, because the standard has to be right. If you're not writing the books that you would want to read, if you're not writing the songs that you would want to listen to, then stop.
Yeah.
And figure out what work is necessary to even with that, to even get within range of that, and maybe get a flip phone.
Love it.
So,
hey, Matt, great to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.
Thanks for doing this.